Yeah. Okay, so 9:06, my start time. We could get the doors closed. Everybody take seats. All right. So, as you guys recall, we are in the middle of the story, and what we're doing is we're threading the overall theme of the Bible. So, not just individual stories about Noah and Abraham and David and Daniel and how they're just interspersed in there, but how they all seamlessly transition into one overarching story. Can anyone tell me what we've created a sentence of sorts that tells what is the overall story in one sentence? Can anybody tell me that one sentence that we've created together as a group? Yeah. Yeah.
Man's continual rejection of God and his blessing as God continues to pursue them until the coming of Jesus and the redemption he provides to display God's glory for God's people.
Yes. Yeah, that's pretty on point. So, man's continual rejection of God while he pursues after them in the ultimate culmination of the redemption of Christ and purchasing his people who declare his glory among the nations. Is that about accurate? Yeah? Good. So let's practice through our walkthrough. If you need your paper, use it. You notice that there is no more papers in the back. That is there for a reason. If you didn't get one at the first, tough luck. You are doing it by memory now. If you've lost yours, you're doing it by memory. All right? So we are on week 3, and so I'm getting to be pretty brutal because I'm expecting by week 8 when I come back, no one will have a paper. So that's my expectation. Oh, Mom's like, oh, really? Let's see about that. I'm your mother. Could be. But let's start to practice without using it. If you need it, use it. But if not, try without using it. I'll continue to use the hand motions to kind of jog our memories. Okay, so our walkthrough starts in what town? Ur. Our 4 main characters are? And God calls them to leave, so they go up what river? For what reason? Until they get to what town? Haran, right? Haran, yeah. Where who dies? And they leave Haran and go into the land of? Where God promises Abraham 3 things. And Abraham has 2 sons. And Isaac has 2 sons. Their names are? Esau, right. And Jacob has how many sons?
12.
And the second to the youngest is? Joseph is favored by his brothers and hated by his favored by his father and hated by his brothers, so he is sold into in the country of, in the house of Potiphar, where he eventually becomes. I kind of died there at the end. Where he becomes what? Right. Because of the famine, Joseph brings his family down to Egypt. Israel grows into or how many people? I try to do a half a finger and it's so hard. Joseph dies, a new Pharaoh takes over, and we have what? 400-year Egyptian captivity, right. Then God raises up a deliverer in who? Pharaoh won't let the Israelites go, so God brings about the plagues, which is to do what? Convince Pharaoh. Let's try that again. If you need to look at your paper, do that, because that was a little rough. All right, so Pharaoh won't let the Israelites go, so God brings about plagues for what 3 reasons? Right. Then Moses leads them out across what sea? And they take a right to where God gives them the law. There are 3 divisions of the law. Right. The first principles of the law are the... And how many laws are there altogether? And God makes a covenant with them. Obey and be... Disobey and be... They say they will obey, so Moses leads them across the wilderness into what town? Right. And where they send how many spies into the land? And what do they say? And the 2 are? And as a result, they wander in the wilderness. For how long? Right, until everyone over? Except? Okay, so then Moses leads them up to the where he gives them the law. Then God raises up a new leader. Joshua leads them across what river? To the capital city of? Where they have a... Right. Then they go 14 miles northwest, the town of where they suffer Achan defeat. After they deal with Achan, they take a south. They take the south how? And the north? Then they divide up the land into how many parts? Who are the prominent rules during this time? Right. The female is, and the strong one is, and the one with all the Bibles. And the period is characterized by, and it's anarchy. So they look around and they see all the other nations have what? So the last judge and the first prophet, who is also the king anointer, is? Right. Who is the first king? And in the book of? Then God promises David, the second king is? In the book of? God promises David that his throne will last. The third king is? In the book of? 1 Kings. The fourth king is? Rehoboam. And who is he? Solomon's son. He wants to become richer than his father, so he taxes the people to death. As a result, the kingdom... And who goes to the north? And who goes to the south? Rehoboam. How many tribes go to the north? And how many to the south? The north is called? And the south is called? I think I just mixed that up in north and south. You guys have to understand I'm really bad with north and south and all that. So north is, and the south is Judah. Who does God raise up to try and shape up Israel and Judah? No one listens, so who does God bring in from the north to take Israel captive? And what kind of people are they? Cruel. How many years after the split kingdom? 200 years. The prophets go in south, but nobody listens, so God brings in. And what kind of people are they? Educators. And how long are they in captivity? Why? They didn't let the land lay rest. How many years is this captivity after the Assyrian captivity? 150 years. Then a new empire takes over. Who are they? Medes and the Persians. They allow the Jews to come back in 3 expeditions. The first is led by, and he rebuilds and the second is led back by, and he rebuilds there. And the third is led back by Nehemiah, and he rebuilds the walls. How long of a silent period between the completion of the Jewish scriptures and the coming of Christ? And who is the prominent leader during this time? So he is Greek, so the New Testament is written in Greek. And we did it! All right, good job. Good job. Keep working on that, and we'll keep reviewing that every week. Last week, we looked at the books of the Bible and how, especially the books of the Old Testament, and how they fit into this story and what the timeline is of the story. So just to review that, what are the 5 books of the law? Well, first of all, let me just say this. There's 3 divisions of the Old Testament. What are those 3 divisions? The law, the prophets, and the writings. Okay, the law. What books are called the law? Right. So when you see, when you hear of Jesus explaining through the law, the prophets, and the writings, this is what we're talking about. The law is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then the prophets, what are those 6 books that cover the whole timeline? What 6 books are those? Yes. Nope. Just those 6. Just 1st and 2nd Samuel are 2 books, and 1st and 2nd Kings are 2 books, right? I heard a Ruth in there, so you're getting in the rhythm. Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Oh wait, no, sorry, don't say Ruth. That is not a part of it. That's included in Judges, right? Ruth goes into the time of Judges, but to cover the whole timeline, we have Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and all the other books fit into there somehow. And then, what are the books in the writings? What are those? No, it's not Ruth. No, Ezra, not Ezra and Nehemiah. What are the writings? Yes, Psalms. So there's one more. Job, right? Those are the books of the writings, right? And so then all the other books that we have fit into the writings. Somewhere, some way in the timeline of that 6 books, right? Remember that? We talked about that? And we have all those books of the prophets, right? So Ezra all the way to Malachi. And when we're in one of those books, right, there's 16 of them that are before the time of exile, and there are 5 that are not. There's 2 that are during exile, and then there are 3 after the exile. What are the books that are during the exile? What is it? Ezekiel and Daniel are the ones that are during the exile, and what are the ones that are after exile? I'm hearing Zechariah and Malachi. All right, that's 2 of them. What's the other one? Haggai, right. So those are the 3 that are after. So if you find yourself in the Old Testament, and especially in the prophets, and you're in anything other than those 5 books, you are before the time of exile. And where God is warning through the prophets, it's about to come. It's about to come. And if you're in Ezekiel, Daniel, you're right during the time of exile. And then if you're in those other 3, you are after Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Got that? I'm going to keep hammering that home so that you guys understand where you are at in this story, because I think a lot of times we just get lost. We just start reading a book, and we have no idea where we're at. So I want you guys to get that in our thick skulls. All right? So on to a new week, a new lesson. Many of us, we know the story in 4 words. It's kind of the common thing nowadays, is to explain the whole story of the Bible in 4 words. Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. Have anybody ever heard that? You ever heard that? Yeah, it's very common. It's kind of come out in the last 15, 20 years to use that moniker, if you will. Creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. Or, and another way is God, man, Christ, and response, to kind of summarize the gospel, to summarize Genesis to Revelation. Do you find that that is how the apostles told the gospel or told the whole narrative of the story in their sermons in the book of Acts? Whoa. 1 no. Who votes no? Who votes yes? So that is how they told the gospel in those sermons in Acts, when we find Peter and Paul and Stephen's sermons. Who votes yes? Now, who votes I don't know? All right, so a lot of I don't knows. So let's just see. Where did they start? Where did the... Dave's kind of going up and down. Explain. Yeah. Where do each of them start? Because in this popular moniker in our generation is to start with creation, and then with fall, and then with Christ. Do they start with creation? No. Where do they start? Yeah. All 3 of them in Acts with Peter, Stephen, and Paul, they all start with Abraham in Genesis 12. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to follow that example of those sermons in Acts and say, all right, if that's where they're starting, that's where we're going to start in our story. Now, we understand that's not to say that the first 11 chapters are unimportant. No, they are very, very important. They're the backdrop to the story. But they understand as God, in His providence and what the story is all about, it starts in Genesis 12. Yes, John? Yeah, this is where you might be a little bit lost. We talked about this in week 1. And so those sermons are Acts chapter 3, Acts chapter 7, and Acts chapter 13. Those are the 3 primary sermons that we have in the book of Acts. So that's what I'm talking about. And just to clarify, that is how when we look at Luke chapter 24 and Jesus opening their minds to understand the scriptures, this is kind of how we see that fleshed out in the rest of the New Testament, is specifically in those 3 stories, or those 3 sermons.
To be fair, when he's talking to the Gentiles in Acts 17,
That's an interesting proposal. Where do you see that?
Acts 17, 24, the God who made the world and everything in it, he's short of heaven and earth, trying to meet by human.
Right. So we have him talking to the Gentiles and introducing it that way. Now, in Peter's sermon to Cornelius, does he start there? Now, he is also a what? A Gentile. So, yeah, there are other ways in which he doesn't necessarily start in creation, but he does say that the God who did this, right? Yeah, Caleb.
Cornelius, though, a God-fearing man. So when I see Paul talking to those that were already God-fearing, he starts in Genesis 12, but the Athenians were not. They had no concept that the God was Bible. So I think when you're dealing with people that have no concept of the God of the Bible, you have to start in Genesis 1,
Mm-hmm.
which honestly is kind of where our culture is.
Yeah. No, the Athenians were not atheists by any stretch of the imagination. So let's not think that they are atheists. They definitely would believe that God made the world. Now, which God is a different aspect, but they would still say that God definitely made the world. There's no such thing as evolution, or there's no atheism that's there. And so he is correcting and saying this is the God who made heavens and the earth. It's this God right here, not your other gods. But at the same time, Cornelius was not a Jew. That's the point that I'm trying to make, is that, yeah, he might be following that God, but he doesn't find himself as part of God's people. He is finding himself as away from God's people, but yet worshiping that God, right? And so that's why he needs to be, because he's not saved at that point, right? Cornelius is not saved when Peter comes to him. Even though he's a God-fearer, it doesn't make him one of God's people. We could probably list, all of us list people that we know are God-fearers, but are not part of his people. And why is that important? So that's what we want to look at. Why does the stories in the book of Acts, all the sermons all start in in Genesis chapter 12? So we're gonna, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, and if this is going to be a version, you can silence me.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, where does the sermon at Pentecost fit in?
Where does the what?
The sermon at Pentecost
Mm-hmm.
fit in?
So what we're trying to do is we're looking at how, now you guys are kind of getting all off topic with other sermons in Acts, but what we're trying to do is trying to outline that story that Jesus is doing in Luke chapter 24. So the way that, how did the apostles, their minds were opened, right, to understand the scriptures, to understand Jesus said, this is who I am in the law and the prophets and the writings to them. And how did they see that in those three sermons? Now, they didn't specifically do that in Acts chapter 2, right? They don't do that in Acts chapter 17. They don't, even Peter doesn't do that to Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. But in those three sermons, they are breaking down what Jesus is doing in Luke 24. Does that make sense?
So the goal is to do it like Jesus, and those three sermons follow that framework.
Right.
That's why we take
Right, because I wish that Luke could have recorded that conversation on Emmaus, but he just says they opened up their minds to understand, and it's like, where is it? And I think that Luke does that in those sermons in Acts. He doesn't do it at that moment, but he does it through those three sermons in three different kind of angles, if you will. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at three parts of the beginning of this story, where the story starts. Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3, and Genesis 15, 1 to 6, and Genesis 17, 1 to 8. So for about 5 minutes, what I want us to do is to kind of break up into a few groups, maybe 5, 6 people of those that are around you, and I'm going to ask you two questions. Why do you think that the story starts in Genesis 12? Why is that so important that each of these guys start in Genesis chapter 12? And two, what were the terms of this agreement that was made? There was a covenant that was made between God and Abraham, and what were those terms? So answer those two questions. Why is it so important it starts here? And what were the elements of the covenant, both on God's part and on Abraham's part? So break up into, yeah, go ahead.
Three references again. Genesis 12, 1 to 3, 15, 1 to 8, and what was 1 to 2?
It was 17, 1 to 8, and it's 15, 1 to 6. 15, 1 to 6, 17, 1 to 8. Yeah, ready? On your mark, get set, bake. Or study. It's blink. The light is blinking.
Was it flashing last week? You know?
No. All right, just kidding. I gave you 1 more minute. All right, so I'm going to work in reverse order on these questions. So, what was the covenant terms of this agreement between God and Abram? What was God's end of the deal?
He said, I will.
I will. I will what?
Make you a great nation.
Descendants and blessing.
Right. Yeah, Sam. To be a shield? I think I just spelled that wrong. I don't know. Maybe God will bless others. Anything else? Yeah. No. Yeah. So yeah, somebody said, Arya, I will. All right, so what was Abram's, what did he bring to the covenant? What was his stipulations? Believe? So to obey? Go? Anything else?
And to physically also obey as far as the circumcision goes.
Yeah.
Not only just in deed, but physically also.
Anything else? Yeah, that says set apart down there underneath circumcision. Just that you're going to be a set apart person. Yeah, trust, believe. This is kind of a maybe a side thing, but to bless others. Right? It's kind of an outflow of it, but he is to be a blessing to others, right? God is going to bless him so that he will bless others, right? Okay, so based on that, why is it so important that each of these guys, they start it in Genesis 12? Why is it so important that the story starts here and not necessarily in Noah or in the fall? Why start here?
God has a plan, he's going to carry out that plan, and he's the one who's going to do it.
Yeah, God has a plan he's going to carry out, and he's going to do it. Yeah.
And something I never thought about until we were just doing this is that in Genesis 11, he divides all the nations in judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right away, here's the path back.
Right.
What it was meant to be.
Yep. Yeah, Genesis 11 is pretty important. You guys know Genesis 11? That's what happens in Genesis 11? The Tower of Babel, in which it was basically, at that time, one nation. And now God has created multiple nations out of that, out of their own rebellion, after their rejection of God, wanting to get to God on their own terms, and making it us versus God instead of us with God. And then he splits them up into nations. And then in Genesis 12, right after that, God calls out one nation and says, you are going to be my people. And out of you, I'm going to bless all the other nations. That's pretty important. What Julie's saying is very, very important, that he's calling out that one nation to magnify and place it. He already said, I'm going to place my glory on all humans, but they are failing in that. And so I'm going to call out one people to do that. And they will be set apart, as we see there, set apart for my glory, and they will display my glory to the nations. So it starts right there at the very beginning. And that is the theme for the rest of the Old Testament, right? Is him fleshing out that promise to Abraham, right? And it's going to culminate in Jesus, and you're going to see that even at the end of the story as well. So this is why this is so important. There are 3 foundational truths that we have to get from this, and that is, one, is that God, and I think we see this, God is saving a people. Not a person, but he's raising up a people. I think in our individualist society, we think, oh, it's just me and Jesus, but he is raising up a people. And we're going to see that all throughout the Bible. It's not just he's getting individuals, but he is getting a people that's going to be his own possession, that they will be his God and they will be his people, not his persons or his individuals, but his people. So God is raising up a people, he's saving a people that will be a beacon for his glory, right? And to be a blessing to others. So he's saving a people that is going to be a beacon of light for the other nations, that is going to bless all the other nations. And his people, they're going to be his people. They are his people through what? How is Abraham his chosen one? It's through faith. And so we'll see these all throughout our story. From Genesis to Revelation, we're going to see these foundational truths. That's already right there from the beginning. God is saving a people that will be a beacon of light for his glory to the other nations, and that are his people through faith. Right? And we see that, all right, what was it, Genesis 17 that said that? That it was his, or was it Genesis 15? 15. That it was his faith that was counted to him as righteousness. So we all know, we kind of know this story, right? These foundational truths are nothing new to many of us. My question is does this foundational truth, does it change your view of Scripture? When you come to other stories, when you come to the story of Samson, for instance, if you come to the story of Saul, or you come to Ezekiel, how are these truths important when you go to all throughout the Bible? How does that change your view of Scripture? Does that question make sense?
I think, Luke, it helps me understand the exile a little bit better,
Mm-hmm.
because the people of Israel failed in their effort to glorify God and to obey him. And so he sent them into exile. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ron is saying that the exile makes a lot more sense, because the biggest condemnation against his people was that they were to be, number 2, a beacon for his glory among all the other nations, and they were failing to do that. And so God sends them into exile for that purpose, because they were failing in that aspect of the promise. Right. Yeah, Tom.
So the question, though, is we start this, why did the apostles start in Genesis 12?
Right.
That hasn't really been answered yet. I mean, we talked about it. It's because probably most of the people knew who Abraham was, and knew that either were the chosen people of God, and when they hear stories of Samson and all that, they remember who he is because Israel was God's chosen people.
Right.
So is that why they started with Abraham?
Right. Because this is the story of the Bible, right? And if this is the story of the Bible, we got to start at the very beginning. Where did God start saving a people? He started right there in Abraham. That's the first person he chose as his chosen people. That's why this is important. That's why it starts here. Because if this is the storyline of the Bible, we have to start at the beginning. He didn't start to save a people in Genesis 3. He didn't start to save a people in Genesis 7 and 8 to 9 with Noah. He starts right here in Abraham to save a people. And he's going to be a beacon of light, and it's going to be through faith that it's going to happen.
So why do you say that it's not through Noah?
Did,
Not who made his promise with, because then he didn't choose to say Noah.
right. But was that to be a beacon to the other nations? Because there was no other nations at that point, right? He destroyed them all, right? And at the same time, was Noah's righteousness through faith?
Did he say that he followed God?
Right. It said he was a righteous man, but not righteous through faith. He was a righteous man.
It does say, though, that by faith Noah,
In Hebrews 11, yeah, right. But
there was faith there.
right, there was definitely, because how could you build an ark when? So he obviously followed God in those times, but his righteousness, it says there's no righteousness by faith. Your faith is counted to you as righteousness, right? Noah was already a righteous man before that. There was no that promise. We see that in the New Testament is tied to Abraham and not to Noah. It's tied to Abraham. So where were we? I forgot.
Well, back to your question.
Yeah.
In Acts, these sermons are basically spoken to Jews. And the Jews would recognize Abraham as the beginning of their knowledge.
Right.
And so it makes sense to me that that's where we start.
Yeah, right. So he's saying that, and to the Jews, they would understand that their nation started with Abraham. So it would make sense that those sermons would start there. And I would say even for us, we are God's people. And we also start where? With Abraham, because we are his people. And God saving his people from there, we are now the others that is being blessed through Abraham. It starts there. So, how does these three truths, it affects our view of Scripture, but does that also affect our lives and how we live our lives on a daily basis?
I'm really troubled because there was one point where Paul was giving a sermon, and the minute he said God sent it to the Gentiles, the Jews went nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And, here he was reminding them, or should have been reminding them, of what their purpose was in the world to glorify God among the nations.
Yeah.
And so I'm challenged to think, okay, we should be glorifying God among the nations.
Mm-hmm.
That's the purpose.
Yeah, right. That's a great point. So Don is saying that, and Paul is talking a lot to Jews who rejected this. They were supposed to accept that and be a blessing to the nations, but then Paul goes to the Gentiles to be that blessing, and the Jews rejected that. And how often we do that. We think we need to be enclosing in our circles here. We need to be a blessing to others in the church, rather than we as God's church, as God's people, is to be a blessing to our city, to our community. Our blessing is not just to retain in these four walls, right? But it's to go and we're blessed to be a blessing out and to be a light and a beacon to the nations, even in Hutchinson, the different people there. So yeah, that does, right there from the very beginning, affect how we live our life. These foundational truths that we are to be a blessing to others. Any other ways that this can affect our lives? Yeah, John.
I think the other thing is on that point number one. So Christianity is not best practice by me listening to this sermon on the way to work or watching the Sunday services at home alone. We're saved as a people.
Mm-hmm.
So just what you were saying earlier about the whole, culturally we are all, we love being independent or individuals.
Mm-hmm. John is saying, in case you didn't hear, that he is saying that my practice of Christianity isn't just me and Jesus, but since number one, God is saving a people, that I am following Christ as a community, not just me listening to sermons on my way to work, but me doing life with people. Any last remaining comments before we wrap up? Yeah, Julie.
It really just smashes any sense of like nationalism, where my identity is found in my boundaries on earth. And to take John's point even further, like to see his intention for all the nations to be that one people, where he doesn't just want us to do fellowship and life with people that are the same as us, but his vision is really for us to do that even with people that come from different places or different than us.
Yeah, so Julie is expanding our boundaries, that we're not, it just kind of crushes our idolatry of, maybe nationalism or things like that. But man, God's border is even beyond that. That he's not bound by nation lines, but to go and even crossing that to people who don't look or act or think like us, to be a blessing even to them. So that's coming from.
Well, and I would say not even just to be a blessing to them, because I think that's one sense where we get the idea. Like we can go and serve those
Mhm.
people and be a blessing to them, but to truly be united and see ourselves as on the same
Yeah.
plane.
Yeah. So those who are God's people, yeah, we are fellow brothers and sisters with them, on the same plane with them, one people, not, okay, you're a church over here, you're a church over here, but we are all God's people.
We're going to serve you, but it's not in its
We're going to see that very clearly at the end of our story in Revelation 7, Revelation 5, where there is people from every tongue, tribe, people, and nation worshiping around the throne. So now we see that this is God saving a people that has been a blessing to all the other nations. So just a sneak peek at the end. I don't want to ruin the story for you, but I just did it. So anyway, I want to wrap us up here a few minutes early, and I do that because John or Josh, I don't know who told me. I think John told me. Yeah. So the youth, if you're a student, junior, senior high, please go to the library and meet John and Josh for some announcements right after that. So right after I pray. Let me just pray as I close. Father, thank you so much for this story. Thank you for introducing us to this story in Genesis 12. We are humbled that you would call Abram from his nation to where he is at, from Haran, and tell him to go into the land of Canaan. And he obeyed, and he listened, and he believed, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And so we are now his children. Abraham is now our father because of that. And so we are so thankful for you calling a people to be a blessing to the other nations and to be a beacon of light. And so we believe this. We are your people. So continue to sanctify us, continue to let us know and to illuminate our minds to see Jesus as the center, focal point of this story. And so we pray this all in his name. Amen. If you all have any more questions, feel free to ask me, but students, go to the library.